Clogged gutters are easy to overlook, but they can quickly cause serious and costly damage to your home. Fortunately, there's an easier way to keep your gutters clean and avoid the hassle. With Leaf Filter, you can protect your home and say goodbye to cleaning gutters for good. I've realized that gutters are more complicated than they seem. It's not just about cleaning them out, it's about preventing long-term damage. That's why I chose Leaf Filter. With their permanent solution, I no longer worry about flooding, roof damage, or foundation issues. Leaf Filter uses patented technology to keep everything out except water. No holes or gaps, just reliable protection. Plus, every installation comes with a lifetime no-clogs guarantee. Protect your home and never clean out gutters again with Leaf Filter, America's #1 gutter protection system. Schedule your free inspection and take advantage of the Spring Spectacular Sale with up to 30% off your entire purchase at leaffilter.com/tune. That's a free estimate, free inspection, and 30% off at leaffilter.com/tune. See representative for warranty details.
This Mother's Day, wrap her in love with Miki Couture. Give mom the softest hug ever with one of our luxurious, cozy blankets. The perfect way to say, you are cherished, you are loved. From movie nights to quiet moments just for her, Miki Couture makes every day feel extra special. Shop now at MikiCouture.com or stop by one of our stores to find the perfect blanket for the perfect mom. Miki Couture. Wrap her in love this Mother's Day.
Greetings, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Blue Frontier. James here, joined by Ryan and Sean. We've got the full crew today for part 2 of our multi-part series we're doing as Everton stare down the barrel of a massive restructuring under the Friedkin Group. In this episode, we'll continue the series that we started with our Newcastle analysis a few episodes ago by analyzing the recruitment of some different Premier League clubs who have improved their fortunes in recent years, and in doing so, look for takeaways Everton might apply to move up the table under new ownership. Today's club is Brighton and Hove Albion, an exciting one to get into. Before we do, just a reminder, if you enjoy the show, leave us a rating and review on your podcast platform of choice. Follow us on socials, engage with us, and join our Discord. All of those links will be in the description. Before we dive into this episode, highly recommend going back and checking out first our Everton executive episode on Angus Kinnear. We did a really thorough deep dive on him and his time at Leeds, which will inform some of the commentary in this episode, as well as the first episode in the series on Newcastle United. And with that, hand it off to Ryan to get us into the show.
Thanks, James. Yeah, we're going to talk about things in a couple different phases, shall I say. Brighton have, the kind of one phase that everyone knows them for, kind of Dan Ashworth influence and whatnot. But really, one of the things that Angus Kinnear brought up in his podcasts and in the episode we kind of reviewed was he thought maybe when Leeds went back down that they were too aggressive. They were shooting for the moon, like trying to find players that were young but had tremendous amount of potential, but maybe didn't invest as much in the now. And while I don't necessarily agree with that, and we talked about that extensively and walked through Leeds' recruitment, we know Everton are probably going to have a big summer, so it's just a matter of are we going to take that type of approach or not. So one of the things he gave as an example was he maintained that since people generally think of Brighton as the best recruitment club on the planet. I don't think that's crazy by suggesting they are. But he maintained that even Brighton started out more risk-averse. And when they first came up, they were more focused on stability and staying in the league. And as a result, they didn't just buy aspiring young talents. They didn't quite have the brand or the approach that they have now. That being said, I'm not necessarily sure that's the case. But we're going to take a first look at that. And then we'll kind of go through the progress of Brighton. We'll talk about Dan Ashworth again and some of the changes they kind of made as a club. And then we'll talk about the current phase, which I think is a bit of a departure maybe towards what they did in the past in some aspects not. But I'll first turn it over to Sean because fundamentally Brighton is the driving force behind one particular individual with I think, a unique background. And that background is really important, I think, in looking at Brighton and evaluating and understanding what they do.
For sure. And Ryan, great transition in terms of the background and talking about specifically the individual, Tony Bloom, who bought an initial 75% stake in 2009 grandfather was vice chairman in the 70s, a longtime fan of the club, so that you have that connection there. Invested heavily in the new stadium, and in 2 years took Brighton from League One to the Championship. 6 years they were in the Championship. They finished 10th, 4th, 6th, 20th, 3rd, 2nd, promoted for the first time in 34 years, and they have stayed in the Premier League since. For all those naysayers that say, it's a yo-yo, there are teams that have actually disproved that. And going through the kind of numbers in regards to their standing, so their first year in the Premier League, 15th, of course that was their first top flight season in 34 years. And then in 2018-2019, they were 17th. They avoided relegation. 2019-2020, 15th. So that kind of continued consolidation that Angus was kind of referring to in terms of the first 3 years. And then things in 2021, still at 16th. And of course, they're kind of a development in this, and we're going to get into it. And then the last 3 years really have been outside of this year, of course, which is unproven yet. But 2021-22, that was their best finish, 9th. And then 2022-2023, they beat that by being 6th and qualifying for European competition. And of course, last year was kind of a tough year for them, at finishing 11th in mid-table, of course, just balancing Europe. And this year, most likely, of course, still many games to play, but they're probably going to finish somewhere between 8th and 10th with 4 games to go. So really kind of a 14-year journey to Europe, and it kind of brings up the question, is Brighton a good model?
Yeah, and it's a fair question. And I think when you think of immediately of what you think about a Brighton, I would say the immediate answer is no. And let's explain that a little bit maybe, or get into it. I mean, Tony Bloom's clearly the force behind Brighton. But what's important is his background, the gambling background, the analytics, and really what they've been known for a long time. Brentford a little bit too, but maybe Brighton more so. They developed their own data models. And they believe, and Angus Kinnear talked about this a little bit, that it gives them a true competitive edge. And if you think about the gambling background, the data, the decision-making, I mean, if you know anything about this stuff, odds, it makes perfect sense. Brentford is the same type of background that drove a lot of what they've done as well. I mean, the rumor is their player algorithms are even a secret to those at the club. I mean, literally the scouts just get the list of names that the algorithm spits out and go watch them. So look, I mean, that's maybe their biggest point of differentiation has been over the years. But I still do think as we go along, there's some key elements that can be taken and some lessons that can be learned. And I think it begs to ask the question first, though, how did they get in the situation they're in? They're not perfect. They're not winning the Champions League or anything, but certainly they're punching above their weights. It's maybe not an exact parallel to Everton, but I do think it's important to explore kind of how they got to where they are, because it's still an amazing story, really, if you think about it.
For sure. And it kind of goes into, of course, Tony Bloom, but having a strong number 2, right? And that's Paul Barber, CEO and now deputy chairman, has been with Brighton since 2012. So you look at that connection between Tony and Paul, obviously 2 key figureheads of the club, but also 2 great ambassadors for them. So really stable ownership on that end. But then also strong identity, right? And I believe the consistency to be in line with youth development and just the innovation, right? Not just data. And one of the first clubs, as you pointed out, Ryan, and I'd like to get you to get into in terms of scouting by position versus region.
Yeah, I got my opinions on that one too, for sure. But it's pretty interesting for sure. I think also the one thing they've done is the clearly stated goals, the identity, and they've really kept to that, right, James?
Yeah, and Bloom has been relentlessly consistent in this, in both like the identity and the vision and the objective of all these things. And their goal has been, for a long time now, consistent top 10 Premier League finishes. And the other thing that they do in terms of consistency is the turnover in personnel below the executive level. They have a profile, a list of attributes that they look for, and they recruit to suit the identity and play style of the squad. They don't rip up the playbook every time they sack a manager and start from scratch, which, of course, we know is something that other clubs do, and it does not really work. And that's what has allowed them, or given them the platform to be so successful, is the continuity. We talk about it, 14 years of building up through the leagues. This is not like a crazy run up through the leagues. They paid their dues in the championship for 6 years. They then they got into the Premier League and they toiled towards the bottom of the table for a number of years. And now it's just a gradual improvement with the long-term vision and commitment, something that a lot of clubs in this league don't necessarily have the ownership group in place to have the patience to be able to do. So I think in that way, in addition to the stats and stuff, they are a little bit of a unique case perhaps.
Yeah, and look, I mean, they've kind of taken off. They soared, as Njai would say. I'm sorry. It's really hard for me to talk about Brighton without making some crack about the seagull.
Got to make bird jokes.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
exactly.
What are we even doing here?
Yeah, no one can see the videos here. I'm flapping like I look ridiculous. No more than how I sound when I do the Sean Dyche imitation, as we were discussing pre-pod. Anyway, let's first talk about the first allegation, though, that Kinnear said, because he kind of alluded to the fact that they almost went,
I'm no tech genius, but I knew if I wanted my business to crush it, I needed a website now. Thankfully, Bluehost made it easy. I customized, optimized, and monetized everything exactly how I wanted with AI. In minutes, my site was up. I couldn't believe it. The search engine tools even helped me get more site visitors. Whatever your passion project is, you can set it up with Bluehost. With their 30-day money-back guarantee, what do you got to lose? Head to Bluehost.com. That's BLUEHOST.com to start now.
a little bit against what we know them for, and this idea that they went conservative to keep them in the league. I think there's some truth to that, but I'm not so sure it really played out that way, nor do I necessarily think it was a very good approach when you really kind of break down things. So a couple different things. So Chris Hughton was their manager. He led them to promotion. He was a manager there for a while. And as we kind of unwind some of the recruitment, some of what Angus Kinnear is saying or implying is somewhat true. So if you really start like in the Premier League, that summer of 2017, their average age in the summer in that window was over 25. They spent 52 million euros, right? They dropped another 18 million in the winter, including this random 19-year-old guy named Victor something or other. He plays for Sporting now, scores a bunch of goals. Anyway, people forget about that. Gyökeres played for Brighton at least very briefly, and they sold him for very low. They bought him for 1 million, by the way. But it's kind of the anomaly when you look at everything else. And look, after the season, they finished 15th, 40 points, only 34 goals. But I guess when you really break down the players that they got, I mean, not a ton of this was driven by recruitment. I mean, Matthew Ryan was key, right? And he was very good, if you remember. Proper was a good player. Davy Proper, and he was a little bit older. No doubt Gross was good. He played an important role. But, man, look at some of these other buys. And, like, Izquierdo, Suttner, Schelotto. These guys didn't get great returns out of some of the big spenders. And it seemed like Hughton got a lot from the guys that were already there. Yeah.
Guys like Lewis Dunk, Shane Duffy, Dale Stevens. I mean, Glenn Murray. Streets remember Glenn Murray scored 12 that season. He led the line for them very, very well. But as you say, the guys that they really spent on weren't the ones that really helped them stay in the league. It was sort of the mainstay established players. So the recruitment, not that great in that first window.
No, you just look at some of the big numbers. I mean, the one that like Sean was looking at off the pod, just couldn't believe is the Jurgen Locadia buy from PSV. They bought two players from PSV. Davy Proper came from PSV. Now, Proper is like more of a steady Eddie. Like, I believe that's a buy to stay in the league and have a certain level. But, like, I mean, Izquierdo. Do people even know who he is at this point? That was 18 million euros.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, like, you know, of course, Locadia and Cincinnati's finest, right, for half a season. But kind of going into the next window, they seem to have this, you know, big ability to want to go big in the Dutch leagues, right? And you kind of look at Janikabash, right, going into the next one. So it's one of those things where I think, like, if you look at the player that they got at the time, not like terrible, but of course in hindsight it's 2020. And so some of these kind of bigger buys, of course, as a yo-yo club, right, at the time, can really hurt you if you don't get it right.
Yeah, and so, I mean, you know, the guys that they spent, I mean, yeah, it was a little older group, but I almost feel like they got better return on some of the younger guys they bought. You know what I mean? And so it's worth mentioning here, and we'll get to it in a second, but in September of 2018, they do mention the appointment of Dan Ashworth as the new technical director, but he doesn't start until much later. His first window was really 2019. So we'll hit that in a second, explore what that really meant first. But let's go through that 2019 window, Sean, because you mentioned their big buy. Did not work out as well. I feel like he went back to the Dutch league and did okay, but that's a pretty big outlay for a club. So they're thinking, okay, we're stable now, right? You know what I mean? Like, let's make a little bit of a jump forward. I guess they still went for some established guys.
Yeah, I mean, the guy that I just was referring to, Yannick Abash, $22.5 million, right? So a pretty big fee. If you kind of ask Brighton fans, really talented player at the time. I think he had the right attitude, right mindset, wanted to succeed, but just kind of, like many players that have been signed for clubs that had kind of high expectations, just didn't hit it, right? And it was one of those situations where they didn't get as much on the sale. But yeah, of course, Basuma for $16.8 million ended up being a great bit of business for them. And of course, Dan Burn, 3.5 from Wigan. The average age there is at 24. So they're going down. They're going in the right direction. But yeah, you kind of look at that window. It's there are a few other guys that kind of come up to play, Ryan, and I think one of them very well.
Yeah, but I think what's interesting is when you look at it, that 24 age, that's not how they do stuff now. You know what I mean? It's still a little bit different. So some of what Angus Kinnear is saying is right. But yeah, if you look at the guys who kind of did make a little bit of an impact, almost none of the guys immediately. The top 7 minutes guys, they were all there. Think about it, all the top 7 minutes guys already there. Some of the guys like Martin Montoya. Can I just say Bernardo's name is like, if you had like a Football Manager regen, I'm assuming they still kind of do this. I'm
they
kind
do.
of out of the loop.
Yeah.
Bernardo Fernandez da Silva. Like, seriously, you just made that up. Like, that's literally half the names of people in Brazil. Sorry, just offended all our Brazilian comrades. I don't mean that. But anyway, he played a little bit. Basuma played a little bit. I mean, look, had Basuma not had some nagging injuries, I think maybe you see a little bit difference there because he was a bit of a coup. I mean, they paid a lot of money for him, but I think a lot of people were surprised that they could get him. That was maybe a little bit foreshadowing going forward, but I don't think anyone's looking at this window and thinking like the old guys they got were great. Now, very interesting, though, as you said, the one guy I know well, Ashworth, when he came in, did make a little bit of a mark in the winter, getting Alexis McAllister from Boca. And as you guys remember, I mean, I couldn't say no. I loved him. There's about one more player that I liked better, and we'll get to him in a minute because I've been annoying about him from day one and was upset that we didn't go get him. But fundamentally, Houghton was sacked in May of 2019. Now, Ashworth still claims that's Tony Bloom. He's calling the shots, which is important. I mean, if you've got a figurehead, the club's going nowhere, and is a good decision maker and making the right decisions, mostly data-driven, you're in good hands, right? I mean, the buck stops with him, but fundamentally, they won just 3 of their last 23 league matches. I mean, they made the semifinals of the FA Cup, so that run probably did hurt them a little bit in the Premier League. But look, man, they finished with 36 points. I mean, they barely finished. 2 ahead of Cardiff. It was not a Cardiff team. And this wasn't the later Brighton teams with the high XG and expected points. I mean, the expected points had them in 18th. And so they went out and hired Graham Potter from Swansea. So you're starting to see some of the core elements here. But before we get into that, let's take a step back and talk about it. So according to Angus Kinnear, did they recruit more for the now? I think we can say yes, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they at the very least, the guys that they recruited did not make an impact, but clearly the intent was for them to play and keep them in the league.
Yeah, but I mean, the ROI wasn't good. So it's kind of like, is there a lesson here to be learned? I mean, good recruitment is good recruitment. And we saw a little bit of this in Newcastle too.
I guess the only thing I would say is, did they recruit more for the now? They bought some older players. The profile of player, I think, lends itself to the now, but those guys didn't make an impact and they didn't get a good ROI, which we'll talk about the numbers momentarily. So it's really hard to decipher really what the strategy was because they didn't get future value and they didn't get present value.
Well, right. And so what I think is very interesting is what was our critique on Leeds? Like Leeds had a very particular strategy. They went for the home run guys, the younger guys, whatever. But I think fundamentally, to revisit it, our conclusion was basically, I don't think it was necessarily a flawed strategy. You just got the wrong guys.
Yeah.
And overpaid for a lot of them too. And so, but look, we see the ROI here. So if you look at summer of 2017 through summer of 2019, the independent of the Dan Ashworth influence, I mean, the numbers speak for themselves, don't they?
Yeah, that's a 146.7 million in gross spend, sales of 75-ish euros, and most of that is from Basuma and Dan Burn. So they took a bath. The ROIs are actually kind of staggering how
Yeah,
bad
the market
they are.
values of those two actually went up.
Right. I mean, they lost 80% market value.
In that first window, yeah. And look at it. I mean, it wasn't good. It was even worse, really. It got a little bit better in that last year. But I think also one thing is worth noting is now when you talk about like the influence then of Ashworth was about getting everyone out. And I think he took a bath or two on some guys, and that probably affected how much they could spend downstream a little bit. But I think he was very committed to the rebuild. But, I mean, Shawnee, we already talked about him, but some of these guys are absolute bombs.
Yeah, I think it goes to show you, though, that fortunately for them, they hit on a few of those guys. And if you do that, at least for the core pieces, which, you think of Dan Burn, you think of guys like that, even Matthew Ryan, right, who was a good goalkeeper for them, for the kind of the early part of their Premier League, they were able to kind of just withstand the storm of having some of those. Unfortunately, spending the money, and that's really kind of what Leeds did, to your point, Ryan, in regards to like Ruter, right? Of course, now on Brighton, funny enough,
Right.
but it's just you can't do that as a long. You have to hit on your big buys, but it's okay. We want to make it clear. You're not going to hit every target, right? And that's okay. It's just if you miss on a target, you don't want it to be the transfer record, right, for your club.
Exactly. And that's what we learned from Newcastle, right? I mean, the one thing we really took from Newcastle is we thought there were some mixed decisions in there and guys that they overpaid for that maybe there was an immediate need. And it's not that they didn't help their club, but they hit on all their every one of their big guys. And it made all the difference. It makes all the difference in the world for now. I mean, they have truly difference makers. They spent a lot for them, but, they've got big returns on those guys above and beyond even what they spent. So if you look at their top three guys, Izquierdo, Locadia, and Janabaka, is that right? Did I get that actually right this time?
You're pretty close. You're pretty close.
It's so sad, dude. It's so pathetic.
That's a tough one, though.
That is a tough one.
Yeah, that's a really tough one.
Okay, but that requires preparation in a pod, and I wrote half of this stuff, so, I should know it. So that's my bad. But anyway, it also stinks, too, because you just totally nailed it, rattled it off like it was common sense to you. But anyway, those three guys were absolute bombs for them. And again, the first two guys never really amounted to anything. No offense, Cincinnati. But look, the bottom line is that Dan Ashworth is making his print on this club. He's really making his impact, and I think fundamentally this is probably a little bit what Bloom has had in mind all along. I think we saw the Alexis McAllister buy, but then it's just going forward, man, that Dan Ashworth is a different beast.
Yeah, and this is at this point that Ashworth takes real full control over the recruitment operations. He did inherit Paul Winstanley, but Ashworth's background was and specialty was in youth development. From The Athletic, we have this article from Andy Naylor and Dan Sheldon. The Locadia and Johan Bach, I'm going to butcher it in a different way, signings predated the arrival of Ashworth in 2019 as their first technical director. His main area of expertise was establishing a clear pathway for prospects such as Ferguson. Ashworth had been the FA's director of elite development for 6 years when Brighton hired him, and this is an article from when he moved to Newcastle. Which we talked about Newcastle already, he basically was tasked with replicating a modified version of the Brighton approach at Newcastle. And so with his arrival, with his consolidation of power, him having full control, you saw a dramatic change in recruitment policy and practice in the summer of 2019 into 2020. Clear hyper-focus on younger players. The team the previous year, the average age was 27, almost 27 and a half, which was the fifth oldest in the Premier League at the time. And we'll go through those windows, and you'll see where they come out on the other side. That first window is a pretty decent one. Their average age in that summer, they brought in Adam Webster, the beloved Evertonian Neil Maupay.
The moped.
The moped. Leandro Trossard, Aaron Moy, Tyreek Lamptey, all guys who played major roles for them. And again, the average age is 23. And with those sort of that squad overhaul taking place. They also had they didn't get a lot of value for the guys outgoing, but again, Ashworth was fine to move those guys out in exchange for these newer players at a younger age.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at it too, they were able to get a decent loan fee for Anthony Knockhart, right? Of course, the infamous Anthony Knockhart. But this was kind of a nice sign for the future, right? Because a lot of those guys, even, you see today in the Premier League, of course, Adam Webster, still a decent contributor for them. Trossard doing great things at Arsenal. You probably felt as a Brighton fan for the first time that there was kind of some sort of unified strategy, and they weren't just kind of throwing darts at a board and hoping, a few of them stuck.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's one thing to buy young players. It's another thing to have the developmental ability, and that's clearly part of Ashworth. And he's, at this point, been at the club for months. He's kind of set up some of those things so you can bring the guys in and start to develop them. I will say this, it is still pretty interesting. They still did recruit a lot from England, from smaller clubs, and that will start to change as they go. So, I mean, there's got to be a little bit of a cultural shift as you go. I will say this in defense of the Moped. The Moped put up 13 goal contributions and 10 goals on a team that was teetering on relegation, right? So it's funny people thought of him as kind of poorly, but I mean, he was, no one came even close to him in that department on this team. So, I mean, he actually ended up doing fairly well. Lamptey's a guy that we don't even mention, too, where they got out of Chelsea's youth group. And, I mean, for very little, and I think he's had a big ROI for them as well. And look, I mean, they only finished 15th with 41 points. The expected points are a little bit better. They were at 13th, and the point is they're investing in younger players now. So your performance hasn't changed. It's probably gotten a little bit better, and you're investing in younger players. I mean, to me, I think that says it all. And, I mean, that's more of the ideal. And look, like, the Moped's a good example of a guy who wasn't particularly old necessarily, wasn't super young, but he's also a little more low risk. I mean, he was far and away the best player in the championship. I mean, he completely tore it up with them, and it made sense within the team what they needed. So kind of moving into the next window. The next window is kind of a little bit weird, and fundamentally, they couldn't buy a whole lot. I think this is pretty much where they kind of caught up to them a little bit in terms of the ability to spend, partially because the prior investments, you just had to eat some of it. And this is very much reflective of some of the situations that Everton were in. I mean, if you'd have bought younger and made better investments and could sell them off, you could have continued to fuel investment if that was a common strategy. So they just hadn't put that strategy so much into place at this point. There were some interesting buys. I think one or two stand out. I think Van Hecke stands out big time, right? I mean, granted, he didn't mature until later down the road. Now he's a heck of a player, but, 2 million euros out of Breda?
Crazy deal.
Voltman out of Ajax is a little bit more mature guy, but, like, he's been solid. Two big free transfers here, right? Danny Welbeck and Adam Lallana. Very interesting. We'll talk about that strategy later. Yes, they're older, but they were frees. You know what I mean? And so that's important, the outlay. And they kind of were forced to do that at this point. That's the interesting part about it. Sometimes it's like in business, when you're forced to compete in certain ways and be tight and be clever, sometimes you end up operating better. I have to admit, I'm a little surprised that Jacob Moder never made it. I quite like him as a player. He's versatile. I think injuries probably hurt him a little bit. But I will say this, in winter of 2021, they got my guy. And I was watching a lot of IDV at the time. They were awesome to watch, and there was this kid in Ecuador that was the most press-resistant young player I think I've ever seen in my life. And for only 5 million euros, winter of 2021, Moise Caicedo shows up, suits up for Brighton. I'll tell you another one here is Evan Ferguson out of Bohemians Academy. We don't even have him in the return on investment calculations, by the way, because he wasn't bought in the first team. So when I did the math on it, only later did I realize, I was like, where's this guy? I mean, I know he should be playing for Everton, right? Of course.
Of course. We need a striker like him.
Right. But again, they made these investments. They didn't make as many investments this year. They bought young players. They finished again at 41 points, 16th. There was no real relegation concerns, but we finally saw signs that this team might be pretty good.
One thing I'd like to add real quick, and I think Brighton did a really good job of it, and they still do to this day, is buying certain players and then loaning them out immediately, right? So, and you saw that with like somebody like Ben White, right? You saw that with Modere. Of course, it didn't work out, Ryan. But even Van Hecke, right? So these guys, that they're not developing just sitting on the bench, somewhere in the Brighton U23s like Tyler and Yango, right? It's just they are like essentially getting playing time. It's just a good job by Brighton in regards to the guys that they're buying, right? They're loaning them out pretty quickly, and you're seeing the benefits, right, in regards to the development piece.
And they're one of the first teams to really dedicate a resource to the loan manager concept. That was David Weir, which is very interesting. I think this is kind of, they had a relationship with Beerschot in Belgium, and so they were kind of using them and loading a ton of players out that way. We'll talk about Union in a little bit here too, but yeah, that's a very conscientious thing, right, Sean? And it's worked. And I think if you got the right match, and I think we saw Everton getting a little better at that as well. James Vaughan, I think, did a very good job. He basically built that thing from scratch, something I happen to know a little bit about, but it's a hard thing to do. He took some good ideas and put it in play and deserved a lot of credit for it. But what I think is very interesting about this team is the expected points. They finished in 16th, expected points over 61. That would have been 5th in the league. And this is where, XGFC got born, right?
Yeah, and this is where the media starts to go wild with the praise for Graham Potter and wringing their hands over the underperformance of the strikers. And this is where I think Brighton really kind of come into their own with these acquisitions. Caicedo was the obvious one. But I think we're now two windows into Dan Ashworth's tenure, or two years into his tenure. And we mentioned at the start of his tenure, they were the 5th oldest squad in the Premier League just 2 years ago. In that 2-year period, they have become the 4th youngest team in the league. And in doing so, yeah, they took a lot of baths financially. They had to sell guys and not get a great ROI, but they moved on from those failures quickly. They identified them, they moved them on, and ultimately they oversaw a huge recomposition of their squad, a lowering of the age, and they were able to do that while maintaining a relatively consistent league position, kind of treading water, building a strong foundation to then sort of push up the league, as we'll get into momentarily.
But it's to your points earlier, right, James? It's reinforcement of that identity. Like, we see what it is. There's no exceptions to it. We're going to see that even more as we go along here. But, I mean, this then just began this absolutely insane run. It was a good performance run, right? They finished 19th, then 6th, made the Europa League, back to 11th 2 years ago. But, I mean, the recruitment from the winter of 2021 to summer of 23, this might be, in all honesty, this might be the best recruitment run of any club. Like, just period. Because I can't imagine the numbers could be any better. So think about this. 21 permanent transfers during that time. The only one that lost market value was Kasper Kozlowski, who I actually kind of thought was okay too. I'm not counting Enoch Wempu, who was an awesome buy, by the way. One of my favorite players. I wanted us to get him so badly. I mean, unbelievable if you think about it. So like, if you start in winter 2019 up until summer of 2023, 37 permanent buys, gross buys 334 million euros approximately. Sales market value combined 701 million euros. Think about that. That's a gain of 367 million euros on top of gross buys of less than that. That's an ROI of 110%. You want to know how you can build a really, really competitive team? You start getting 110% returns off your investments. Oh, my God. By the way, if Chelsea did that, they'd have the greatest team in the history of mankind.
I was just about to say that they were the anti-Chelsea, Ryan. Like, yeah.
From $1 billion to $2 billion?
Which is ironic, because Paul Stanley is the guy doing all the recruitment at Chelsea.
True.
Yeah.
I mean, Chelsea is at least buying young guys. But look, we talked a bit about it, but, how did they really do this? Not all young guys, mostly, though, right? A lot of them. But think about, like, from winter 21 to 2023. James, you said it, right? What's the average age look like?
They never had a single window where the average age was higher than 22. So they're buying very young guys and giving them the opportunities, loaning them out, or giving them meaningful minutes.
And so, Sean, let's talk about the loan concept a little bit, because they were using kind of Beerschot in Belgium, but there was a purchase here that kind of we didn't report in terms of chronology that has become very important for that club.
Yeah, so going into the Tony Bloom purchase of Union Saint Gaulis, USG, in 2018 with Alex Musio, helped both Brighton and USG, who were both promoted to the top division in 2021. Of course, Ryan, as you mentioned, Beerschot in Belgium. They were runners-up in 21 and 23, so you look at that kind of experience, making the Europa the last 3 years and the quarterfinals in 2022 and 2023. So it's really that built-up reputation for youth development, right? And kind of going into some of the value pieces. There's some great guys there, right?
Yeah, and it's perfect timing for them, too. As their aspirations grew, now they have the ability to send a bunch of guys to the club that they own. They can control their destiny. They won the Belgian Cup in 23-24. Like, for them, that's insane, And so now USG becomes their direct partner, which they made a very minor investment in. It was low dollars in 2018, but bam, they're in the top division now, and they're even better than Beerschot ever was, and they can control their destiny. What a great place to loan someone out. I would love for Everton to have that kind of relationship. Always think about, let's loan them to the championship. Well, why? I think there's also an important thing to be said. They're becoming more and more international as a club. Brighton was at this point. More adaptable players, that type of thing. I would like to see Everton embrace that a little bit more. I think there is something to be said for sending a kid overseas. It's just Belgium. It's not that far. In America, we think it's like next door, right? But in all seriousness, I think that's a good experience for someone to be out there kind of on their own and develop for a young player, in a good environment. But look, if you look at the buys, though, too, there's some value in there, too. This is not all 20-year-olds that are amazing.
Yeah, no, definitely not. We talked about already. Trossard, Webster, Matoma, ever heard of him? Estupinian, all age 24, still on the younger side, and Veltman was 28, Undav 25. So still guys in their mid-20s, but not the 22-year-old, talking about maybe first senior team type of appearances. Guys who are a little bit more established than that, like a tier further along in their career, but they still get insane value from those guys with a lot of upside still to go.
Yeah, of course. And then you kind of look at, and we talked about this earlier, right, in terms of the older cheap players, and that's really a big kind of benefit to if you can kind of scan the market every season to see some of the frees out there, right? You look at what Everton did with James Tarkowski, for example, right? Just kind of a core piece. Even somebody like Ashley Young, right? That's just a decent squad player at kind of cheap wages. That can make a massive difference. And so looking at kind of Danny Welbeck, Milner, those guys, really were helpful in terms of the bridge that Brighton kind of built to get to where they are now.
And the youth development, right? You need some leadership in the team.
Culture.
And so, right, culture, agreed. But what's that worth to you? How much are you going to pay for it? In this instance, not a ton. You'll pay some in wages. But, yeah, I think that's important. You know what I mean? If you're going to buy young players, you have to have an environment that will work actively to develop them. And it does help to have some old, steady guys that can teach and have leadership capabilities. A lot of those guys have been there and done that.
And you're looking at them basically playing opposite ends of the market. They're very different markets, the youth market and then the kind of older past their prime type of player who can still contribute. And sprinkled in, you have players kind of in that middle range of 25 to 28. But it's a really good distribution in terms of you're not getting stuck with guys on huge wages that are only going to decline in value.
And, the data helps them to buy down risk, for sure.
One thing I want to also say, and it's kind of one of those things to give Brighton even more credit, right? They don't have the wage capability that some of these other clubs do, right? So for them to recruit a Danny Welbeck, a James Milner, an Adam oh my God. Adam Lallana. Yeah, I know. It's just, it can roll off the tongue sometimes or it could stop you in its tracks. But those guys, right, they were part of successful clubs, right? And so that's a good kind of statement of intent from Brighton to simply say that, they're doing the right things if they're attracting these type of players, and to kind of pay them, they don't have the ability to pay them significant wages, is good for Brighton.
I also think we see the transition to sales to buy, and so a lot of that's simply driven by what you just said. They can't afford the wage structure. So when guys get to a point, you got to move them on, but it's almost always on their terms. They're selling guys as opportunity knocks. And I think fundamentally, no one's irreplaceable to them. They just don't view it that way. Someone goes, someone comes in, no problem. And I think that's where it really starts to come into fruition, like in 21, 22. And look, prices start rising at this point for younger players as well. But what enables them to get the buys and the replacements is the reputation that's improved. And then, being in the position where they can wait and extract the sort of sales. I mean, Ben White for, 59 million euros, Dan Burn at his age for 15 million euros. Like, those are deals where they felt like they probably couldn't turn down. And that's fine. And who did they buy as a result? That facilitated the buys for Mwempu, Kukurea, Kozlowski, their only loss. Sema, I like Sema. I don't know if he's ever going to be a great player. Dennis Undov is a guy that we've not mentioned, by the way, who they got from Union. But let me tell you what, I love that guy. That guy's been an unbelievable player, even though they bought him at age 25, by the way. I mean, his numbers have been outrageous in Germany. But Matoma, nice window there. You know what I mean? Like, Sarmiento is the only one you look at, and it didn't really work out. I mean, those guys, almost every one of those guys hit in a big way. And that's kind of where it started. So, and the funny part is that first year, the net spend, positive. This is where the crazy net spend trend starts as well, too. All positive until very recently. Okay. However, on the horizon, certain issues are going to happen.
Ryan,
but James, before you get there.
They sell Ben White, Dan Burn, they buy all those guys, and then they finish 9th. So they do all that, and then they improve and match it with their expected points. So anyway, please continue.
That's right. The XGFC becomes we actually score now. And maybe that has to do with them getting rid of the moped. Anyway, no, that's not fair. That's not fair. Come on, we defend the moped on this podcast. At least I do. All right, so issues. February 2023, Dan Ashworth leaves Brighton. I don't even know where he is at this point. I'm not sure he does. Replaced by David Weir. Paul Winstanley.
These days, I can do anything from my phone. Book a vacation, order a meal from a 5-star restaurant, buy and trade stocks. But maybe the most amazing thing I can do is make my dirty laundry disappear and then reappear perfectly washed and folded. I have Rinse to thank for that. I just schedule a pickup in the Rinse app or at rinse.com. A Rinse valet comes to get my clothes, and before I know it, they're back, crisply folded and ready to wear. They even do dry cleaning, which is returned hanging in a nice Rinse garment bag. And with Rinse, my satisfaction is guaranteed. If for any reason I'm not happy, they'll re-clean my clothes for free. Best of all, Rinse saves me tons of time each week. That's time I get to do something I love versus something I have to do. So if you want to save loads of time by not doing loads of laundry, remember, there's an app for that, Rinse. Sign up now and get $20 off your first order at rinse.com. That's RINSE.com.
Goes right after, replaced by Sam Jewell. Potter leaves for Chelsea in September 2022. That worked out. Replaced by almost immediately by De Zerbi, who I think did an amazing job of coaching Brighton. And it's funny, when he left, you're going to see that identity pounded against him and some of the reasons why he left. But look, no problems at all, right? I mean, they're even better, 2023 too. Look at the sales. And I think this one is, if there's one sale transaction that typifies Brighton's genius, I think it's the selling Kukurea for 65 million euros. And he is a good player. Like, I'm not saying he's not. But to immediately come back and grab Purvis Estupiñán for less, much less, who I think is probably a better pure left back. I mean, period. I don't think they wanted to sell Basuma, but I think they kind of had to at that point. They get 10 million euros to Everton for the moped. I know that didn't work out. But think about it. So Trossard is a really important player for them and a very good one. But at his age, they dump him to Arsenal in January for 24 million euros. I mean, it's almost something you can't turn down. But look at all the players they brought in.
Well, one thing on Trossard, he had 6 months left on his contract, Ryan, and he still got 24 million. I mean, that's just incredible for that from them, right? So, and you're right in terms of Estupiñán, as we all agree. I think is just a better like-for-like player, and you get that amount of money for Kukurea. And I believe it was ended up being a $15 or $16 million fee for Estupiñán, so it wasn't much at all.
Yeah, in pounds, I think. I think Transfer Market's got him about 18 million euros.
Yeah.
And look who else they brought in. this is where they're
Julio
starting to really
Enciso.
recruit in different places. Yeah, right. Yeah. And
Yeah.
Ciso, man, watching him play at Libertad was so much fun. Like, he would just shoot from everywhere, Even Billy
And he's been a bright
Gilmore.
spot for Ipswich this year. So it's, and once again, Brighton doing a good job of getting guys on loan to get them playing time in kind of the current setup. Billy Gilmore was kind of a good fit for them.
Yes,
interesting
good fit for
player,
them, right, Sean?
And they ended up making money on, or decent profit on him. And of course, Adingra, right? Just kind of a very dynamic player that has just really kind of risen up this year. Buonanotte is another one, right? At Leicester, loan, unfortunately, not the greatest loan in regards to playing time, but the strategy is there. And he was playing more under Steve Cooper than he is Rude. And then Ayari, who's kind of been somebody that I think is starting to kind of get, more momentum. And once again, you look at net spend. What is it?
Positive 83 million, and they got better. And also look at kind of where they're getting guys from, Paraguay, Spain, Norjylland. Norjylland has so many gems going out of there, Argentina for Buonanotte. Buonanotte only played like half a season in Rosario, really played a lot. And he was like 18 when they bought him, Ayari from AIK, all over the place. So I think that's really interesting. Okay, and 23-24, we go into their last year kind of this current phase with a lot of the sales to buy. And, this is where the couple big sales come. And this is how we get all the return on investment numbers. You could see it. They're outrageous, really. Caicedo, 116 million euros. Alexis McAllister, 42 million. Robert Sanchez, 23. They finally get rid of some of the other guys out there as well, too. And it enables them to bring in João Pedro from Watford, who Everton loved, right? Who's a fantastic player. Balaba, from Lille. Just, super high ceiling guy, right? Verbruggen from Anderlecht for 20 million euros. I think that might turn out to be a pretty good investment. Igor's a little bit different. That kind of goes against him. And so one thing we do kind of see here a little bit is De Zerbi leaves in May of 2024. And when he leaves, you hear a little bit about what he was doing, because you can start to see maybe there's a little bit of conflict here as we go into the next season. So thinking about a couple things. So De Zerbi is the one that really pushed for Dahoud from Dortmund. Now, he was a free. He was a center mid, and he was thought of a couple years prior as a really hot prospect. Never quite got over that prospect hump. He was 27, though. Big wages. This wasn't like a veteran presence guy for leadership. It was more of an opportunity. And apparently De Zerbi really pushed for Igor Julio from Fiorentina as well. Now, he's 25 years old. He's 20 million. It's not way off the model, but they have really made a hard transition at this point into young players. So I don't think either fit the Brighton model. And I think they've said that after the fact. Another one, Valentin Barco. Super stud prospect. Looks like he's like 10 years old, by the way. He might be the youngest looking player in world football. From Boca, who everyone knew. Absolute superstar young kid. 9 million euros. He didn't think he was ready for the Premier League, wanted to send him on loan, and wanted help in January. And at this point, Bloom was like, nope. Think about it. They won their Europa group. They were in the 5th round of the FA Cup before the window closed. They had a bunch of injuries. And what did Bloom say? James, identity, right?
It's all about identity. You have to fit within the system. You have to be a piece in the overall machine. And he just isn't going to tolerate the kind of dissent or ruffling feathers. There's another bird joke for you guys. So that's the end of the... Despite the performance, despite doing extremely well, and I think this at the time kind of caught everyone out of the blue when De Zerbi left. It really, based on how so many other managers lose their jobs, it wasn't due to poor performance or anything like that.
But I think what's very interesting is Bloom had not spent and invested that much in the team for a while now. And you could tell there's kind of some pressure to be like, all right, we're on the cusp of something here, but they took a little bit of step back in terms of performance in that year. So what does he do? And I think we see a bit of a change here going into 2024. So it's kind of like some of the stuff is still the same, but, the positive net spend trend goes away in a very big way.
They decided to take a book out of Chelsea, right, Ryan?
It kind of felt this way. They didn't sell any hotels. But, this is, I feel like this is about the biggest. Is this the biggest net spend in the Premier League, I think, that summer?
It was, yeah. You're talking about 3 consecutive
Brighton.
years where They made what, almost 170 million, like positive.
It's outrageous.
Net spend. And then they come out of nowhere and they spend 230 million euros investing in their squad. And they spend big on a lot of guys. I mean, Ruder from Leeds, almost 47 million euros. Minte from Newcastle took the deal right out from under our nose. 35 million. Whiffer from Feyenoord, 32 million. Gruda from Mainz, 31 million. I mean, they spent 30 million or more on 5 guys, and then they spent more than 10 on 5 others. I mean, they spent Matt O'Reilly from Celtic, almost 30 million euros himself. Seamas from Nuremberg, 25. So they're just rattling off the huge fees, and it just kind of caught everyone off guard, caught me off guard. Like, this is not the Brighton that we've come to know, but maybe Bloom, again, saw that sort of slip back, saw that they had made these enormous profits and said to invest, or are they now going away from the model with the established kind of Premier League footing that they've made for themselves? Are they trying to make that next step?
I mean, they're going away from a dollar standpoint, but I mean, these guys are all top young players, right?
It's kind of interesting, right? Because it fits their overall profile, right? That has been so good to them in regards to net spend, but they, to your point, they really have broken the bank for a lot of really great young talents, by the way. So it's not to say that they just spent, money on a bunch of 28 and 30-year-olds and just kind of almost pulled a West Ham and looking at Nicholas Füllkrug to, save their season. But yeah, it's just kind of one of those situations where also, were they trying to support Fabian Hürzeler in regards to like give him, this 32-year-old manager or whatever he is, like
maybe
a kind of a stepping stone?
I mean, he had no input, really. I mean, that was kind of the weird part they made it said.
Right.
But I think what is interesting, though, is, and this kind of goes back to James' point up front, it's like low fee, like value, and low wages. So I have no doubt there's some low wages in here, but, I mean, value? Don't get me wrong, they may turn out to be valuable, but this looks a little bit more like Newcastle really spending the money on young players. I mean, that's a big fee for Ruder.
But he's 22. It's huge, and it could go badly, but you're looking at, again, the age profiles. They signed 2 24-year-olds. They signed 3 19-year-olds.
Yeah, I just... But it's not like you're signing Valentin Barco for $9 million.
Right,
Like,
right.
You see a little bit of that. Like, Ibrahim Osman for 19.5. That seems reasonable. That seems more like it. Diego Gomez from Miami, $13 million. I mean, he's a really talented guy. I kind of get it. But, I mean, Minte, $35 million. And that's not like a small, like, value type investment. To me, I think they've compromised a little bit the fees, but I kind of wonder why. I mean, is this people catching on, right? If you start to do well, people are going to steal your guys. They're going to steal your approaches. Maybe someone catches wind that Brighton's after someone. It's almost, I mean, there are no gems anymore. People don't understand that. Like, everyone knows these players. It's not, you know what I mean? But like Gruda was known as a top young player from Mainz. Maybe if Brighton wasn't on them immediately and people knew it, maybe he goes for 25 or 20. But now he's going for 31. Number one, he's going to the Premier League, and they know Brighton can spend a little bit. And there's competition for these guys. Chelsea probably plays a role here, by the way.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you definitely see some inflation there. I mean, Chelsea's splashing 70, 80 on young guys too. So it's like, clubs, I think, are definitely more reluctant to sell. It's almost like if a Brighton comes in and you're Celtic, Mainz, like, you're like, okay, well, I don't want to get totally fleeced here. Like, they see something that we see. We're not going to play ball and just, we've seen what you've been able to do the last 3 or 4 years and the value you've extracted.
But do we think they're hitting a wall at this point? I mean, because this is a little different. I think it feels a little bit different. Obviously, a massive net spend like this is a little different. And they had some good sales, too. Do we think they're hitting a wall, though?
I mean, this season has not gone to plan for them, right? And there's kind of a few reasons for it, and that's not something we'll get into specifically. But I do think that they've probably had a little bit of almost appetite to say, we don't want to just simply be known as a club to be simply the feeder, right, to get these fees, right? They want to be high in the Premier League, right? They might not want to be, a top 4 team, or of course they want to be, but in regards to the ability to be that, of course, requires significant investment. But I think they definitely have the ability, as they've shown, and desire to be in the top 10 and try to be one of those European teams every year.
I wonder this, though. This could be one of those times where look at the just sheer number of players they bought. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 guys coming in on permanence in a single year. Now, granted, 3 of these were in the winter window. I mean, this could be one of those things where it's just hard to gel, you know? And there are reasons why they weren't as good this year, too. But, man, I feel like they should have been. It could be manager. You know, maybe they didn't get the manager hire quite right. Maybe. I don't know if that's true. But this may be one where we're going to see the benefits of this maybe next year more. I mean, a couple of these guys, I mean, it's hard to transition to the Premier League. It's not easy. A lot of these guys may have gone on loan before. Maybe they feel pressure not to send them on loan because the fees were so big. I mean, and, you know, they also transitioned some older guys. Like, Lallana's out, you know. I mean, Welbeck's still there, but Dahoud obviously didn't work out. But, I mean, I think they were just moving him on. I mean, what do people think here? I mean, are they going away from their strategy? I'm not seeing as many of the loans. I don't know. I'm kind of curious what you guys think, too, before we really talk about takeaways for Everton.
I think it's also hard to say because this is such a departure, such a radical departure in 1 year from what we've seen in the past. So is this just a one-off? Will they go back to, you know, will we see a positive net spend for Brighton this summer? I don't know. Maybe that's not the case. But I do think the players in this window, it's almost impossible to imagine they see a 110% ROI on these guys just because of the outlay. So
Sure.
You might still get an ROI, 20, 30%, and maybe they're content with that if you get the performance that warrants it. But I don't think that's enough to get them into like progressing into the next stage of like if they want to, you know, Bloom has said regular top 10s in the Premier League. Do they want to be regularly competing for Europe, or are they okay to kind of linger in the middle of the table, occasionally pushing for Europe for the foreseeable future? Again, it feels very much like Bloom from the start has played the long game. Is he content with sort of Brighton being where they are and treading water for a number of years? Or does he really want to push into the top? Because really we've talked about it, it's really hard to push into the top echelons of the Premier League without spending.
I will say this. I mean, you saw this the season prior, and I think it's actually a pretty decent comparison in Bournemouth kind of really spending a ton of money, right, with a bunch of players. You look at Milos Kerkez, Tyler Adams, Luis Sinisterra, and it didn't really Andoni Areola ended up having a good season, but it kind of took them a season or so, right, to really get it right. And you've kind of seen them have a very solid season, although they've kind of just died down the last month or so. And I think Brighton, once again, have struggled with injuries for some of these guys, right? Like Ferdy Kirku has been out most of the year. Weaver has been another guy that's been out. And so I think that has really hurt them because they've also been a team that they started the season really well, had a really big dip, won 6 in a row, and then now are kind of just, you know, back to being even. So I think, James, you make a pretty solid point there in that maybe it takes time to gel, and also, too, maybe they just need a season under a new manager, right? Because that's another thing that has come to really kind of get it right.
The one thing I will say, though, that I'm not seeing here is in the past, you saw the obvious development, a lot of the loans, a lot of the guys going out. Now, maybe injuries is some of the reason for this, but a lot of the guys did play a bit. Now, maybe you're paying a little bit more because you feel like these guys are ready to go. Like you're not trying to get the pure gem anymore, and that's fine. But other than Barco, who got loaned out, who finally it worked out in Strasbourg. He's playing very well right now. I mean, how did Evan Ferguson work out in West Ham? It's not working great.
Not so good.
And Cizo's getting minutes at Ipswich. I can't necessarily deny that. Ibrahim Osman.
Buonanotte.
Buonanotte, I mean, Sarmiento is not looking like necessarily the best purchase either, is maybe a little bit surprising. Seema's been okay, but I just feel like the loans have a little bit different feel. Like Zmigas is interesting. He's going to Nuremberg. You know, they paid a lot of money for him. Stefanos, you know, because he kind of let him go. You know, they sent him back, you know, at Nuremberg. So I get a little bit of that, but I'm not seeing a Union St. Gilloise here. I'm not seeing. So is that maybe Dan Ashworth leaving? So I don't know what's the future here of Brighton. You know, they clearly have a ton of young talent. They bought a lot of it. I think it's probably safe to say they'll probably be better next year. Maybe they'll make a manager change. I don't know. But that would be interesting, right? Because I feel like they've gotten so much right for so long. I mean, clearly they're going to have some transitional periods, I guess.
Do we think that this could be a summer, though, that, I mean, they almost cashed in a Matoma, right, for that big Saudi money. That could be a potential kind of outlay for them to be able to spend money even with this. You look at Baliba, who's I think increased his value tremendously this year, right? In that spot for them. They have some guys, right, where they can be flexible if they feel like they have targets that they want to spend on. So that's kind of they're in an interesting place where I think they'll probably give the guys that they bought this season, another season or so, but some of those guys that have really been tried and true for them, they could probably make some good money off of.
These days, I can do anything from my phone. Book a vacation, order a meal from a 5-star restaurant, buy and trade stocks, but maybe the most amazing thing I can do is make my dirty laundry disappear and then reappear perfectly washed and folded. I have Rinse to thank for that. I just schedule a pickup in the Rinse app or at rinse.com. A Rinse valet comes to get my clothes, and before I know it, they're back, crisply folded and ready to wear. They even do dry cleaning, which is returned hanging in a nice Rinse garment bag. And with Rinse, my satisfaction is guaranteed. If for any reason I'm not happy, they'll re-clean my clothes for free. Best of all, Rinse saves me tons of time each week. That's time I get to do something I love versus something I have to do. So if you want to save loads of time by not doing loads of laundry, remember, there's an app for that, Rinse. Sign up now and get $20 off your first order at rinse.com. That's RINSE.com.
I think there's some truth to that, but again, if you pay that much money for some of the young guys, some of that upside's a little bit limited, so they're maybe in a transitionary period. But regardless, all right, let's take a step back. We've talked a lot about Brighton. We've gotten into it as usual, as we typically do. What about takeaways for Everton? Because we said up front some of the data stuff. We should use data, things like that. We're far away from building a true core competency in data. That requires years. It requires very detailed expertise. We would have to have significant investment to do that. I don't necessarily think that's necessary. But I do think there's some takeaways. And I think the number one is that although they're known for all the youth purchases, I think if you looked at how they got into Europa and then 9th place and how they became a really solid Premier League team, I think there was a little bit more balance for veterans than I think maybe people realized. But I think the key was they didn't spend a lot for the experience and leadership. And it seemed to be part of this development mix and concept, right?
Yeah, it's about striking that right balance. You need veterans, and we've talked a little bit thinking about Everton summer. Like I think anyone being reasonably pragmatic recognizes we're going to have to do some business in the free transfer market, or older guys who can come in on low wages just because there's so much turnover needed.
But balance is, I think one thing that's a little misnomer is, your point is balance in terms of leadership and age and performance, and because just the sheer numbers we need to bring in. But I think the lesson here is balance in terms of investment.
Yeah.
We shouldn't spend that much money on stuff that have no ROI.
Right. Well,
and you don't need to. I don't think you need to. Like, if you can
get
bring
the
in
ROI in a different way. It's not a financial ROI. It's a kind of more difficult to measure qualitative ROI with the players in the dressing room and building a culture and things like that.
Yeah.
And that's the return you get from getting guys on a free or on low, very low transfer fees or low wages. Like, you still get that presence. You get to build a culture because there's a lot of guys leaving. We're going to have to rebuild in a lot of different facets.
There's still value there, right? And they're got,
Correct.
like, you can get a Dan Byrne if it's real value and he's a really good fit and he gives opportunity maybe he didn't have before. They sold him and made money for him. But again, the sale's just a proxy for market value and performance, right?
Right.
You see it like Lloyd Kelly
Yes.
is a great example we used at Newcastle. That was a great buy. Did he make a massive impact? No, but they got a ton of value from him. Now, they chose to sell him, so that value is realized in terms of a financial gain. But we're not necessarily even talking about that. Adam Lallana was a really good buy for them, Brighton. He filled in well. He provided leadership. He's annoying, as we know, but he was good. And Welbeck, I think, is look, strikers are expensive. Danny Welbeck has done a pretty admirable job in terms of return on investment on the pitch. That's been a goldmine for him. He's done fairly well, even if he's not the greatest player. You know what I mean? So some of that, James Tarkowski is a very good example. When you can't spend money, that's a guy that even right now, we knew you're never going to sell him downstream for big money. But even right now, he's on big wages, as he should be, because he was a free, but he's got great leadership ability. And maybe as we transition to a different style of play, he'll fall by the wayside a little bit. But, we're going to have to do some of that.
It's a really good point, just like the market value being a proxy for like performance. Because,
I think
once
it's
you get a certain
interesting.
point, Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing to think about because, as you say, Tark offers a lot of intangible things, but his performances this season have been essential to our back line. He's done a really good job, really consistent, never going to be like unbelievable. He's never going to have hit the highs of a Branthwaite, but he's going to be steady and consistent and afford those guys who are more talented, higher ceiling, a platform to really show what they've got.
Well, we learned what happened in David Moyes running recruitment at West Ham, right? And they had that short-term burst where they were good, but because of the way they invested, they could only go down. It's just how it was. So I think you got to be careful. I think you can take from Brighton to say that you got to invest at least if you have good recruitment and you can find value and growth together, look what it can do for you. It can really have you overachieve. Now, a full developmental model is tough to maintain. And when you're so good, people are going to steal from you. Like Everton has a little bit more ability, I think, to sustain and keep people than does Brighton. I think we simply have just a higher ceiling as a club. But I think there's something to be learned from executive staff turnover. And if you got someone like Bloom that's really solid at the top, you can deal with it pretty well, I think, even though we may be seeing some exposure here at the end. But look, I mean, I think that's something that you can learn from Brighton that they did very well with. You could tell they were ready. Like Ashworth left, Weir came right in. You know, he was ingrained in the culture. He got it. He understood Bloom was comfortable with him. And who have they kept the whole time? Barber has stayed. Bloom has stayed. So there's some continuity, but it's that commitment to that identity for the players they brought in. I just wonder if we've seen maybe them finally not getting some things right with the manager hire and then spending a lot now more on these younger players. It'll be interesting to watch. Do we think the Friedkin Group can provide that sort of stability and guidance in terms of ownership? They don't strike me as that hands-on, but maybe Angus Kinnear's their guy. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest question, right? And we're going to be talking about it a lot this summer with Everton specifically because you're already seeing kind of the carousel of names being tossed in and around. And we expected that to happen, right? Of course, when you're going to have an ownership change, you're going to want them to get their guys in. Of course, you expect that some of the tried and true guys, much on like the pitch, off the pitch, that have been so fundamental for this organization to stay because they're just good people and they're good at what they do. So that is going to be a worry for us, and I think that'll be something that we'll have to judge Angus probably in 2 or 3 years to understand, did he get the hires right and did we support them?
But you still see the commitment to the model. Like, for example,
Sure,
when De Zerbi
100%.
starts complaining and pushing for transfers and stuff, he's out. And I mean, I think that was a surprise. I mean, and it's not like he went to Real Madrid.
Yeah, no, I think that's all fair. I also think there's a question to be asked of like by far the most successful windows and trading deals that Brighton did were all overseen by Dan Ashworth. They've done well under Weir, but we've seen in the most recent window a change in strategy. As this plays out over time, I think it'll become more clear how much of a role Ashworth truly played in that, and how integral he was to their model.
I got a feeling it's the development was the key for him. Maybe that's the big flaw. Now, you think you'd set everything in motion, it just can continue. You'd think that maybe that's not the true. But I would say this, like maybe part of their transition is simply changing expectations in a fan base. I mean, you got to admit, some of their behavior almost as fans was, I think, a little surprising, I thought, this past year. I mean, it's almost like they used to be everyone's darlings, and now it's kind of like, who the heck do you think you are a little bit? Which is, I don't like to talk about that stuff because it's kind of nonsense and intangible. But I think it's interesting. Like, is Everton able to take this type of strategy? Do our fans have the patience for it? I don't know if there's much. I don't really like those conversations, but I'm at least kind of curious what you guys think. And is there a lesson there?
I think our fans, believe it or not, I would say definitely do have the patience just given what they've seen the last 3-4 years. I think as long as there could be a roadmap to success, right? As long as you can kind of see smart business, right? Of course, we can agree to disagree in regards to, hey, is this player a good buy or is that player a good buy? But I think as long as they can start to see some stability in the ownership realm and the management realm, the kind of this transfer committee, right, to be able to actually kind of just be some sort of collective unit, I think you'd see a lot of patience from our fans. And I think just the joy that they've seen the last few months just from the on-the-pitch performances from David Moyes, right, has brought a calmness to the organization and the fan base. So if you can just have that even for a season, I think they'd still be pretty content.
Few thoughts on I guess both these last points. I mean, we're in a different position, obviously very dramatically from Brighton, in that Bloom, as you talked about, Bloom and Barber have been the constants, and then the pieces underneath them have kind of shuffled around. We are now establishing a totally new structure organization, and how long will that persist? If Kinnear stays for 5 years and leaves, do we continue with a transfer committee? Like, how committed are the Friedkins to the top-down structure in the same way that Tony Bloom is? And furthermore, how patient are the Friedkins in terms of performance? Tony Bloom was content to take 14 years to get to Europa League. I don't really think the Friedkins will be around for a decade and a half, and B, I don't think they'll be willing to kind of tread water for multiple years, depending on, what their performance metrics and KPIs look like for the organization.
I mean, we went through their tenure at Roma too, right? Where they kind of tried to, do some immediate things. Roma's a different place than Everton, obviously, and they've dialed back and they've kind of been back and forth. It was hard to really gain. There was some recruitment insight there a little bit, but we've gone away from the structure they had there. It's kind of odd and hard to see. So it makes me think the Friedkins, who are not very vocal and not very prominent at Roma, will probably see a lot of that. Like, we're not going to hear from them very much. However, I think I'm encouraged the fact that Angus Kinnear was so open in front. And I think transparency is the key. So what Sean said, having the plan, having an approach that is clear, I think fans will be patient if they see logic. They see a sound strategy and a sound direction. Now, fans will pick apart what they're saying if they're very transparent and they're open, because we've had none of that for so long. Like, Bill wouldn't even talk to the people. And you heard nothing from Farhad. He was too busy on his yacht. Well, I don't know where he was, but I'm assuming.
Probably
he had a yacht in Monaco.
If I had a yacht, I'd be on it.
That's my point. I mean, didn't they have like the fish disco thing? Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm getting off track. The point is that if you have a good approach, if you can articulate that approach and you're transparent about it, and I think that's really important for this club, because you're going to be the people's club. You got to talk to the people. I think the fans will have some patience.
I mean, Ryan, just think of when, Kevin Thelwell had, one of his maybe 5 letters in his time at Everton, talking to the fans, just being transparent of what's going on. Of course, much of it wasn't great news, but even just the idea of transparency, it was like, the movie Holes when it started raining, right? It's just like, it's just, I mean, everybody.
What is up with the Holes references? This is not the first time.
It's an incredible film and book.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I agree, Sean. That's a really good analogy.
Can we talk about age gap right now?
It's water
no,
in
I've
the
seen it.
Water in the desert. Water in the desert is what really. It was so refreshing.
Come on, man. Like, we got to give him a little bit of credit. But yeah, it's just even when Marcel Brands, right, like would, talk to fans and just believe it or not, remember
talk to fans?
In COVID when he had that kind of forum with all the people on Zoom, like it's just stuff like that, like just will kind of galvanize the fan base and at least just give you some confidence that you at least have some sort of faith in what's being done
for a while.
Right.
For a while.
It only buys you so much time. Like and I think that's right. Like, you have to be measured in the objectives that you set forth. And that's why I think Bloom, like, eventually we want to be regularly top 10. If the Friedkin group say that to the Everton fans, that is not the ambitions that this club, A, should aspire to, but B, like, the fans will tolerate. That can't be the goal. You have to shoot a lot higher. Yeah. And then when you are perceived to being falling short of that, then, like, hey, we want to be with it. We want to be regularly competing for Europe. Okay, well, if we're finishing 10th 5 years from now, people are going to be really mad. People are going to be really frustrated.
As long as you don't hear the Farhad Mashiri, we're going to make that quick transition to Europe, take advantage of all the revenue and kick butt. I mean, as long as you don't hear any nonsense like that.
It sounded so good at the time.
Not to me. I was like, this is going to crash and burn. And so that's my concern. I just, again, I have my concerns about manager influence, short-term focus versus longer-term focus. I haven't heard anything from Angus Kinnear because he's not hired yet. Well, we'll see. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the club's making big decisions, though, and that concerns me a little bit because I'm not hearing the strategy right now. I don't know what they're doing. In fact, I see a lot of these moves, and I don't like the moves. So we'll see. Maybe there's method to their madness. Maybe they'll have their Paul Barber. Maybe that'll be Angus Kinnear. Maybe he'll be the one that will guide us to everything. And it's not fair to also say that they don't have it. He's not here. Like, I can't blame him for that. Begs to ask the question, who's making the decisions? But the point is, I think there are some things that we can learn from Brighton. I mean, certainly having a bit of balance, James, but I still think we need to go heavy on ROI. We're not going to be able to outspend Chelsea. I think you could even apply this type of model with a little more balance, and you're starting from a higher base, right? And you can really go after these guys, but it will take time. You need to still stick to whatever strategy you have. I think we've learned that, right? I mean, you can't compromise that, man, and we shouldn't have to. I think managing turnover as you deal with success, I think that's something that every club can learn from. And I do like the idea that you kind of have the figurehead, and even Dan Ashworth would talk to the fans a lot too. I think Brighton was pretty good transparency-wise, even though we hadn't brought that up. But I really think the ROI thing is the biggest thing for me, man. The best way and the fastest way to get better as a team is recruit well, period. I mean, you can get a good coach too. That matters. I think David Moyes is a good coach. I do. I think he is. But I think that's at least the key for me. I just hope we do it right. Anyway, that was a lot. I think we got through most of what we wanted to do. I know it's not the perfect fit, but Angus Kinnear brought it up to begin with, so we felt like we had to counter. And look, the bottom line is Brighton are known for the recruitment, so I thought it was a logical team to kind of mirror and look at. So,
yeah, I mean, these episodes to me are always fun because I think you learn a lot about a club like Brighton, which you think kind of at surface level, but there's just so much that goes on right behind the scenes, as well as things that you might forget about that have happened. But also just want to say how excited I am to be at Goodison in a few days, and I will be wearing my Blue Frontier hat. So if any kind of folks across the pond see it, love to talk to you, love to engage. I'll be at the Winslow for sure with Barry Jones, one of our Discord's own. And really hoping that I could finally see a Goodison win. I say finally, I've only been to one match, but hoping, they don't do what, was done to James, unfortunately, with the promoted side. I want to break this curse, and so I want to be the person that kind of just takes this all away. So,
well, I'll say this too.
I want to change the story, Ryan.
Do the hard yards change story.
We gotta wrap this guy.
I know. Anyway, if you see Sean Kahn, my friend, say hello.
Say hello for sure.
But yeah, number one, too, please, all feedback is welcome. Thank you so much to our listeners. I know they kind of asked for a lot of these. It seems like these are popular segments. Hit us up, whatever you want. We'll post some of the stuff in the Discord as well, any visuals that we need. And yeah, I mean, we'll keep hitting them.
We sure will. I really enjoyed this. Hopefully, our listeners do as well. I enjoyed recording it. Always a pleasure with you gentlemen. If you enjoyed it as well, please do us a solid. Leave us a rating and review on your podcast platform of choice. If you like this kind of content, follow us on social media. Reach out. Let us know if you have any feedback for us. As Ryan said, we're totally open to it. This is a bit of a departure from the typical very Everton-centric stuff that we normally do. But hopefully people find it educational, entertaining, and all of that. We're going to leave you there. Oh, Ryan has, as always, one last word. Go ahead.
Pour one out for Dan Purdy.
Pour one out. We'll get into that in the future. But yeah, Dan Purdy, pour one out. We'll miss you. All the best. And we'll leave it there. Until next time, up the Toffees.
It's true that some things change as we get older. But if you're a woman over 40 and you're dealing with insomnia, brain fog, moodiness, and weight gain, you don't have to accept it as just another part of aging. And with MIDI Health, you can get help and stop pushing through it alone. The experts at MIDI understand that all these symptoms can be connected to the hormonal changes that happen around menopause, and MIDI can help you feel more like yourself again. Many healthcare providers aren't trained to treat or even recognize menopause symptoms. MIDI clinicians are menopause experts. They're dedicated to providing safe, effective, FDA-approved solutions for dozens of hormonal symptoms, not just hot flashes. Most importantly, they're covered by insurance. 91% of MIDI patients get relief from symptoms within just 2 months. You deserve to feel great. Book your virtual visit today at joinmidi.com. That's joinmidi.com.
If you love chilling mysteries, unsolved cases, and a touch of mom-style humor, Moms and Mysteries is the podcast you've been searching for. Hey guys, I'm Mandy.
And I'm Melissa. Join us every Tuesday for Moms and Mysteries, your gateway to gripping, well-researched true crime stories. Each week, we deep dive into a variety of mind-boggling cases as we shed light on everything from heists to whodunits. We're your go-to podcast for mysteries with a motherly touch. Subscribe now to Moms and Mysteries wherever you get your podcasts.